The morning after the incident, the quiet suburban neighborhood buzzed with tension. News of what happened spread like wildfire, first through local channels and then across national headlines. Social media erupted with videos, photos, and heated debates. Some clips showed fragments of the traffic stop, blurry footage captured by a neighbor's security camera, but none provided a full picture. What everyone agreed on was this: a decorated U.S. Army general was dead, and a police officer's K-9 had killed him. The details were murky, but the outrage was crystal clear. Protesters gathered outside the police station within hours, holding signs that read "Justice for General Holloway" and "Enough is enough." Voices rang out in chants, demanding accountability. For many, this wasn't just about one man. It was about years of frustration boiling over. People saw it as another example of systemic inequality, where black lives seemed expendable to those in power. On the other side, some defended Officer Ryan Callahan, claiming he was doing his job and reacting to a perceived threat. Supporters argued that policing was already hard enough without second-guessing every decision officers made. The divide grew wider with each passing hour. Meanwhile, Callahan sat alone in his small apartment, replaying the events in his mind. He couldn't shake the image of General Holloway lying motionless on the ground. Sleep eluded him. Food tasted like ash. His wife, Sarah, tried to comfort him, but even she struggled to find the right words. "You're not a bad person," she said softly, sitting beside him on the couch. "But you need to figure out what really happened. This doesn't feel right." Callahan nodded, though doubt gnawed at him. Was he being set up? Had someone wanted General Holloway gone and used him as the unwitting tool? Or was it all just a tragic mistake born out of fear and poor judgment? He didn't know, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't ignore the questions swirling in his head. As protests intensified, investigators began piecing together the events leading up to the shooting. They combed through Callahan's record, reviewed bodycam footage, and interviewed witnesses. At first glance, everything pointed to a routine traffic stop gone wrong. But something felt off. Why would a high-ranking military official draw attention to himself by parking improperly? And why hadn't anyone heard of any ongoing issues involving General Holloway before? Then came the whispers, rumors that General Holloway wasn't just a soldier, but also involved in classified operations tied to national security. Some suggested he might have been working undercover, gathering intel on corruption within law enforcement agencies. Others dismissed these claims as conspiracy theories, but they added fuel to the fire. If true, it meant the stakes were much higher than anyone initially thought. Back at the protest site, emotions ran high. A young woman stood near the front lines, her face streaked out. The night was quiet, the kind where you could hear crickets chirping and leaves rustling in the breeze. The suburban streets of Virginia seemed almost too peaceful, like nothing bad could ever happen here. But peace can be deceiving. Officer Ryan Callahan had been patrolling these roads for years. He was known as a good cop, fair, hardworking, and dedicated to keeping his community safe. His K-9 partner, Max, was always by his side, a loyal German shepherd trained to protect and assist. Together, they were a team people trusted. That trust would soon shatter. It started with something small, a routine traffic stop. A black SUV was parked at an odd angle near a dimly lit intersection. The driver hadn't turned on their hazard lights, which caught Callahan's attention. He slowed down, pulled behind the vehicle, and activated his cruiser's flashing lights. As he approached the car, flashlight in hand, he noticed the driver sitting calmly behind the wheel. It was Lieutenant General Marcus Holloway, a decorated U.S. Army officer who had just returned from a high-profile deployment overseas. Though Callahan didn't recognize him immediately, there was an air of authority about the man that made him stand out. Callahan tapped on the window, signaling for the driver to roll it down. General Holloway complied, his face calm but tired. "Is there a problem, officer?" he asked politely, his deep voice carrying a tone of respect. Callahan explained the situation, asking for the general's license and registration. Everything seemed normal, until it didn't. As Holloway reached into his glove compartment to retrieve the documents, Callahan's instincts kicked in. Something felt off. Maybe it was the way Holloway moved, or maybe it was the long hours Callahan had spent on patrol, making him overly cautious. Whatever the reason, Callahan's mind raced with worst-case scenarios. What if this wasn't just a simple traffic stop? What if the man posed a threat? "Keep your hands where I can see them," Callahan barked, his voice sharp and commanding. Holloway froze, confusion flickering across his face. "I'm just getting my papers, sir," he replied, his tone still respectful but tinged with frustration. But Callahan wasn't listening anymore. His training took over, clouding his judgment. He signaled for Max to step forward, ready to act if needed. Seconds later, chaos erupted. Whether it was a miscommunication, a sudden movement, or simply fear driving his actions, Callahan gave the command. "Max, hold." The dog lunged toward the car, teeth bared. Before anyone could react, Max was inside the vehicle, attacking Holloway with brutal force. The general fought back, but the dog's strength was overwhelming. By the time Callahan realized what was happening, it was too late. Holloway lay motionless, blood pooling around him. Callahan stood frozen, his heart pounding in his chest. The peaceful night was gone, replaced by screams and sirens as backup arrived. News of the incident spread quickly, shocking the nation. A decorated war hero, a pillar of the military, had been killed, not by an enemy abroad, but by the very system meant to protect him. And as Callahan stared at the lifeless body of General Holloway, one thought echoed in his mind. What have I done? As Ova dug deeper into her father's double life, the pieces of the puzzle began to form a picture that was both heartbreaking and infuriating. Her investigation led her to an old friend of her father's, a retired military intelligence officer named Colonel James Reed. At first, Reed was reluctant to talk, his loyalty to General Holloway evident in the way he hesitated before answering Ava's questions. But eventually, the weight of what had happened broke through his silence. "Your dad wasn't just a soldier, Ava," Reed said, his voice low and heavy with emotion. "He was one of the best undercover operatives we ever had. After your biological father, Agent Hayes, was killed in the line of duty, Marcus stepped in to protect you. He adopted you, gave you his name, and did everything he could to shield you from the dangers of his work." Ava listened intently, her heart pounding as the truth unraveled. She learned that her biological father, Special Agent Derek Hayes, had been investigating a corrupt network within law enforcement when he was murdered. The case was officially ruled unsolved, but whispers suggested it was a hit ordered by powerful people desperate to keep their secrets buried. General Holloway had taken up the mantle, working quietly to expose the same conspiracy while raising Ava as his own. Reed handed her a folder filled with documents detailing her father's covert operations. Among them were names, dates, and transactions linking Deputy Chief Grayson to illegal activities ranging from bribery to human trafficking. It became clear that Grayson wasn't acting alone. He was part of a larger cabal determined to maintain its grip on power at any cost. Worse still, the documents hinted that General Holloway had uncovered evidence so damning it could dismantle the entire operation. But there was more. Reed revealed that General Holloway had confided in him about receiving threats in the weeks leading up to his death. Someone had warned him to back off or face the consequences. He knew the risks, Reed said grimly, but he also knew he couldn't let this go. He wanted to leave the world safer for you, Ava. The revelation left Ava reeling. For years, she believed her father was simply a devoted military man who loved his family. Now she realized he had sacrificed everything, including his safety, to fight a battle most people didn't even know existed. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them away. There would be time to grieve later. Right now, she needed answers. Her search took her to her mother, Evelyn Holloway, a woman she hadn't spoken to in months due to strained relations. Evelyn lived in a modest house on the outskirts of town, her once vibrant personality dulled by grief. When Ava arrived unannounced, Evelyn looked surprised but welcomed her inside. Over cups of tea, Ava cautiously broached the subject of her biological father. Evelyn sighed, visibly torn between protecting her daughter and telling the truth. "I never wanted you to know," she admitted finally. "Derek was brilliant, brave, and kind. But his work put us all in danger. When he died, I thought we were free. Then Marcus came into our lives, promising to keep us safe. He loved you like his own, Ava. Everything he did for you." Hearing this only deepened Ava's resolve. She realized that her father's death wasn't just a personal tragedy, it was a message. Whoever orchestrated it wanted to send a warning. No one who crossed them would survive. But they had underestimated her. Instead of cowering, Ava felt a fire ignite within her. She wouldn't let their fear tactics win. She owed it to her father, and to herself, to finish what he started. That night, Ava sat alone in her apartment, surrounded by files and notes. The enormity of the task ahead weighed heavily on her shoulders, but she refused to give in to despair. Somewhere out there, justice waited, and Ava Holloway was going to find it. As investigators sifted through the evidence from the tragic incident, one discovery stood out: a small worn wallet tucked into General Marcus Holloway's jacket pocket. Inside, they found a faded family photo that would change everything. The picture showed a young girl, no older than 10, smiling brightly as she stood between two men. One was unmistakably General Holloway, his uniform crisp and decorated with medals. The other man wore a suit and tie, a subtle gold badge pinned to his lapel. It didn't take long for detectives to identify him. Special Agent Derek Hayes, a respected FBI operative who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances nearly 2 decades ago. The revelation sent shockwaves through the investigation. Who was this girl? And why did her father have ties to both the military and the FBI? Digging deeper, investigators uncovered the truth. The girl in the photo was Ava Holloway, now grown up and following in her father's footsteps. Ava wasn't just any FBI agent. She was known for her sharp instincts, relentless drive, and knack for solving complex cases. What made this discovery even more startling was her current assignment. Ava worked in the same city where the shooting occurred, stationed at the Bureau's regional office. Word of her connection to the case reached Ava faster than expected. When her supervisor called her into his office, she immediately sensed something was wrong. Her heart sank as he handed her the photo, explaining its significance. For a moment, Ava couldn't speak. The weight of the news hit her like a freight train. Her father, the man she admired above all others, was gone. And not only that, but his death involved layers of secrets she hadn't anticipated. Ava demanded answers, insisting on being part of the investigation despite the obvious conflict of interest. She knew the rules, but she also knew she couldn't sit idly by while strangers dissected her father's life. With reluctant approval from her superiors, Ava began digging into the details surrounding the traffic stop. Every piece of information felt personal, every unanswered question a dagger to her heart. Her search led her to cross paths with Officer Ryan Callahan during a tense interview session. Callahan sat across from her in a cold, sterile room, his hands clasped tightly together. He looked exhausted, his eyes hollow with guilt. Ava stared at him, trying to reconcile the man before her with the image of the officer who had unleashed his dog on her father. Anger bubbled beneath her surface, but she forced herself to stay calm. This wasn't about emotions, it was about facts. Callahan hesitated when asked about the moments leading up to the attack. "I thought he was reaching for a weapon," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But now, I don't know what I saw." His uncertainty only fueled Ava's suspicions. Was he lying, or had someone manipulated the situation to make him act rashly? Determined to uncover the truth, Ava delved deeper into her father's recent activities. She discovered cryptic emails and documents hinting at covert operations involving law enforcement corruption. One name kept appearing: Deputy Chief Raymond Grayson, a high-ranking official within the local police department. Grayson was charismatic, well-liked, and seemingly untouchable. But Ava sensed there was more to him than met the eye. Back at home, Ava struggled to process everything. Memories of her childhood flooded back. Weekends spent playing catch with her dad, late-night conversations about justice and fairness. Now those memories were tainted by unanswered questions. Who was her father really? And how far was she willing to go to find out? When Ava received an anonymous tip pointing to classified files hidden in an old storage facility, she realized the conspiracy ran deeper than she'd imagined. Someone wanted these secrets buried, and they might be watching her every move. As she prepared to investigate further, one thing became clear. Uncovering the truth wouldn't just bring justice for her father. It could expose a web of corruption threatening to tear apart the very fabric of trust in their community. The alliance between Ava Holloway and Ryan Callahan was uneasy at best. They were an unlikely pair, a grieving FBI agent driven by a personal vendetta, and a guilt-ridden police officer desperate for redemption. But they shared one thing in common: a determination to uncover the truth. Together, they began piecing together the tangled web of corruption surrounding Deputy Chief Raymond Grayson. Each clue brought them closer to the heart of the conspiracy, but it also put them squarely in the crosshairs of danger. Their first breakthrough came when Ava hacked into an encrypted email server linked to Grayson's inner circle. Buried within the messages was a smoking gun, detailed plans to silence General Holloway before he could expose their illegal operations. The emails referenced code names and cryptic phrases, but one stood out: Operation Clean Slate. It was clear now that her father's death wasn't random. It was premeditated. Someone had orchestrated the traffic stop, knowing full well how it would end. Callahan, meanwhile, used his connections within the police department to gather intel on Grayson's closest allies. He discovered that several officers under Grayson's command had been involved in suspicious activities, everything from falsifying reports to intimidating witnesses. One name kept popping up: Detective Harris, a longtime enforcer for Grayson who specialized in tying up loose ends. When Callahan confronted Harris during a routine briefing, the man's icy glare sent a clear message: back off, or else. Despite the growing risks, Ava and Callahan pressed forward. They arranged a secret meeting with a key informant, a low-level contractor who claimed to have insider knowledge about Operation Clean Slate. The rendezvous took place in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, its crumbling walls providing little protection against the cold night air. The informant, a jittery man named Vince, handed over a flash drive containing damning evidence. Video footage of Grayson meeting with known criminals, financial records showing money laundering, and even audio recordings of him discussing ways to eliminate threats like General Holloway. "This is enough to bring him down," Ava whispered, clutching the flash drive tightly. But Vince shook his head nervously. "You don't understand," he said. "Grayson has eyes everywhere. If he finds out you have this, you're dead." As if on cue, headlights pierced through the darkness outside. Tires screeched as multiple vehicles surrounded the warehouse. Before Ava or Callahan could react, armed men stormed inside, shouting orders. Ava quickly hid the flash drive in her jacket pocket, while Callahan instinctively stepped in front of her, shielding her from view. "Stay calm," he muttered under his breath. "We can talk our way out of this." But talking wasn't an option. The intruders weren't there to negotiate. They were there to silence anyone connected to the investigation. Chaos erupted as Ava and Callahan fought back, using whatever they could find as weapons. Callahan tackled one attacker, buying Ava precious seconds to escape through a side door. Bullets whizzed past her ears as she ran into the night, clutching the flash drive like a lifeline. Once safe, Ava contacted her FBI superiors, sharing the evidence and urging them to move quickly. Meanwhile, Callahan managed to overpower another assailant and grab his phone. finding texts implicating Grayson directly in the attack on the warehouse. Though battered and bruised, they regrouped later that night, realizing they had struck a nerve. Grayson knew they were onto him, and he wouldn't stop until they were neutralized. Yet, despite the danger, neither Ava nor Callahan considered backing down. For Ava, this fight was about more than justice. It was about honoring her father's legacy and ensuring his sacrifice wasn't in vain. And for Callahan, it was a chance to prove that he wasn't just a cog in a broken system, but someone willing to stand up for what was right. "We've got him cornered," Ava said firmly, her voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. "Now we just need to finish this." Callahan nodded, his expression grim but resolute. The road ahead was fraught with peril, but together, they were ready to face whatever came next. Ava Holloway wasn't someone who backed down easily. Her father had taught her that persistence was key to solving any problem, whether it was fixing a broken bike chain as a child or navigating the complexities of an FBI case. But this was different. This wasn't just another investigation. It was personal. Every clue she uncovered felt like a piece of her father's legacy being pieced back together, even if the picture forming was far darker than she'd ever imagined. Determined to dig deeper, Ava pored over the classified files she'd found in the old storage facility. The documents painted a chilling picture. A network of corruption spanning law enforcement, local politicians, and shadowy contractors. At the center of it all was Deputy Chief Raymond Grayson. His name appeared repeatedly in memos, emails, and financial records tied to illegal activities. It seemed General Holloway had been gathering evidence against Grayson and his associates before his death. Ava's heart sank as she realized her father hadn't just been a victim of a tragic mistake, he'd been targeted. Her search for answers brought her face to face with Officer Ryan Callahan once again. This time, their meeting took place in a quiet coffee shop on the outskirts of town, away from prying eyes. Callahan looked nervous, glancing over his shoulder every few minutes as if expecting someone to appear. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began hesitantly, "about your dad, and how this might not have been my fault." Ava raised an eyebrow, skeptical but curious. "What are you getting at?" Callahan leaned closer, lowering his voice. "There's something I didn't tell the investigators. Before the traffic stop, I got a call from dispatch. They told me to check out that area specifically because of suspicious activity. But when I asked for more details later, no one remembered giving me those orders." He paused, swallowing hard. "Someone set me up." The revelation sent a chill down Ava's spine. If Callahan was telling the truth, and she had no reason to doubt him, it meant her father's death wasn't random. Someone had orchestrated the entire scenario, using Callahan as a pawn. Anger surged through her, but she pushed it aside. There was no room for emotion right now. Only facts mattered. Together, they decided to work cautiously, sharing information without fully trusting each other yet. Ava knew Callahan still carried guilt for his role in the tragedy, but she also recognized his desperation to make things right. For his part, Callahan saw Ava as both a threat and an ally. She had resources and connections he lacked, but her sharp tongue and piercing gaze made it clear she wouldn't hesitate to turn on him if he stepped out of line. Their uneasy partnership led them to a key witness, a retired police officer named Carl Jenkins. Jenkins had worked under Grayson years ago and claimed to know about the deputy chief's shady dealings. Meeting him in a dimly lit diner, Ava and Callahan listened intently as Jenkins recounted stories of Grayson covering up misconduct, laundering money, and silencing anyone who dared speak out. "Your dad was onto him," Jenkins said, pointing at Ava. "He was close to blowing the whole thing wide open." But Jenkins warned them that going after Grayson wouldn't be easy. "This guy has friends in high places," he muttered. "If you're not careful, you'll end up like your old man, or worse." Despite the risks, Ava refused to back down. Late nights turned into early mornings as she pieced together the puzzle, connecting dots others had missed. Meanwhile, Callahan wrestled with his conscience, questioning whether he deserved redemption or if he was too deeply complicit in the system's failures. Their shared mission forced them to confront uncomfortable truths, not just about Grayson, but about themselves. As the stakes grew higher, so did the danger. Ava started noticing strange cars parked outside her apartment and unfamiliar faces lingering near her workplace. Someone was watching her. Yet, instead of fear, the surveillance fueled her determination. Whoever was behind her father's death had underestimated her resolve. They thought she'd crumble under pressure, but they were wrong. Ava Holloway wasn't just seeking justice. She was fighting for the truth, no matter where it led. The aftermath of the warehouse confrontation rippled through the city like a shockwave. Deputy Chief Raymond Grayson's arrest dominated headlines, exposing the dark underbelly of corruption that had festered for years within the police department and beyond. The evidence Ava and Callahan had uncovered painted an undeniable picture of greed, manipulation, and betrayal. High-ranking officials were stripped of their titles, criminal charges filed, and investigations launched into every corner of the compromise system. For many, it was a long-overdue reckoning, a chance to rebuild trust in institutions that had failed them. For Ava Holloway, the victory came at a cost. She stood by her father's grave one quiet morning, the sun casting golden light over the cemetery. Clutching a single red rose, she knelt down and traced her fingers across his name engraved on the headstone. "You did it, Dad," she whispered, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "Your fight didn't end with you." In that moment, she felt a mix of pride and sorrow. Her father's legacy would live on, not just in the justice served, but in the courage he'd inspired in her to keep fighting for what was right. Back at the FBI office, Ava threw herself into her work with renewed purpose. She became a vocal advocate for transparency and accountability, pushing for reforms within law enforcement agencies nationwide. Her determination earned her respect among colleagues, though some still saw her as too idealistic. But Ava didn't care. She knew change wouldn't happen overnight, but she was willing to dedicate her life to making sure it happened eventually. Ryan Callahan, on the other hand, made a different choice. Haunted by the role he played in General Holloway's death, he submitted his resignation from the police force. It wasn't an easy decision. Policing had been his life for nearly 2 decades, but he realized he could no longer serve a system he no longer trusted. Instead, he began mentoring young officers, teaching them about ethical policing and the importance of questioning authority when necessary. He also started volunteering at community centers, working to bridge the gap between law enforcement and the people they swore to protect. Despite their vastly different paths, Ava and Callahan stayed in touch. Their relationship evolved from reluctant allies to something resembling friendship. They met occasionally for coffee, sharing updates on their lives, and occasionally reminiscing about the case that had changed everything. Though forgiveness didn't come easily for Ava, she appreciated Callahan's efforts to make amends. And Callahan, for his part, respected Ava's strength and resilience, often marveling at how far she'd come since their first tense encounter. One evening, as they sat together at a small cafe, Callahan broke the comfortable silence. "Do you ever think about what your dad would say if he could see us now?" he asked cautiously. Ava smiled faintly, stirring her coffee. "I think he'd be proud of me for not giving up. And maybe he'd understand why I can't forgive you completely yet." Her tone softened. "But I do believe you're trying to be better. That counts for something." Callahan nodded, accepting her words without protest. He didn't expect absolution. Not fully. But he hoped his actions might help prevent another tragedy like the one that had brought them together. As weeks turned into months, the city slowly began to heal. Protesters who had once filled the streets now channeled their energy into advocacy groups focused on reform. Conversations about systemic inequality and police accountability gained momentum, fueled by the courage of those who refused to stay silent. Ava and Callahan's story became a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, individuals could rise above fear and mistrust to demand justice. In the end, neither Ava nor Callahan emerged unscathed. Scars, both visible and invisible, remained, but they carried those scars as reminders of what they'd fought for and what they'd lost along the way. Together, they proved that redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about learning from it and using it to create a better future. And so, amidst the pain and progress, Ava continued honoring her father's memory by standing tall against injustice. Callahan, meanwhile, found solace in knowing he'd helped right a wrong, even if it meant sacrificing pieces of himself in the process. Though their journeys diverge, their shared experience bound them forever, proof that even broken systems could give rise to unexpected alliances and newfound purpose. The final showdown took place in an old, abandoned warehouse on the edge of the city, a fitting location for a confrontation that would decide the fate of so many lives. Ava Holloway and Ryan Callahan had spent days planning their move, knowing they only had one shot to take down Deputy Chief Raymond Grayson. The evidence they'd gathered, the flash drive, the encrypted emails, the financial records, was enough to expose his crimes, but they needed to ensure it reached the right hands without interference. Grayson wasn't someone who went down quietly, and they knew he'd fight back with everything he had. Using intel from Vince, their informant, Ava and Callahan tracked Grayson to the warehouse, where he was meeting with key members of his network. It was a risky play. Walking into enemy territory meant putting themselves directly in harm's way. But they didn't have time to wait for backup, not when every second counted. Ava carried the flash drive in a hidden compartment of her jacket, while Callahan brought along a small handgun, just in case things turned violent. As they approached the dilapidated building, the air grew thick with tension. The sound of distant voices echoed through the empty halls, punctuated by the occasional metallic clang of shifting debris. Ava signaled for Callahan to stay close as they crept inside, their footsteps muffled against the dusty concrete floor. Peering around a corner, they spotted Grayson standing at the center of the room, flanked by two burly men who looked more like bouncers than associates. His sharp suit contrasted sharply with the decay surrounding him, a symbol of the power he wielded despite the crumbling setting. "We need to get closer," Ava whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of fluorescent lights flickering overhead. Callahan nodded, gripping his weapon tightly. They moved cautiously, using stacks of crates and rusted machinery as cover. Just as they positioned themselves within earshot, Grayson's phone buzzed loudly. He answered it, his expression darkening as he listened. "They're here," he said coldly, snapping the phone shut. In an instant, the atmosphere shifted. Armed guards appeared from the shadows, blocking every exit. Ava's heart raced, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Now or never," she muttered, stepping out into the open. Callahan followed, raising his hands in surrender. "Grayson," Ava shouted, her voice cutting through the silence. "It's over. We have everything. Your meetings, your deals, your orders. You can't run from this." Grayson smirked, unimpressed. "Do you really think a couple of amateurs can take me down?" He sneered, motioning for his men to advance. "You've made a big mistake coming here." But Ava wasn't backing down. She held up the flash drive, letting it catch the dim light. "This is going straight to the FBI and the media. Your empire ends tonight." Her words struck a nerve. Grayson's confident facade cracked, revealing the desperation beneath. "Take them out," he barked, and chaos erupted. Callahan acted quickly, firing warning shots to scatter the henchmen, while Eva darted toward a nearby computer terminal. If she could upload the files remotely, they'd be safe even if something went wrong. Bullets ricocheted off metal surfaces as Callahan fought to keep the attackers at bay, his years of training kicking in. Despite being outnumbered, he managed to disarm one man and use his own weapon against him. Meanwhile, Ava worked frantically, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Sweat dripped down her face as she navigated firewalls and encryption codes. Behind her, she heard Callahan grunt in pain. He'd been grazed by a bullet, But he kept fighting, determined not to let her down. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the upload completed. "It's done," she yelled, relief flooding her voice. With the evidence secured, Ava grabbed a fire extinguisher and smashed it into a nearby window, signaling for the backup team they'd secretly alerted earlier. Sirens wailed in the distance as police cars surrounded the warehouse. Grayson realized too late that he was trapped. As officers stormed in, he tried to flee but was tackled to the ground, his polished shoes slipping on the grimy floor. Breathing heavily, Ava and Callahan watched as Grayson was handcuffed and led away. Justice had been served, but the victory felt bittersweet. For Ava, it was closure, a step toward honoring her father's memory. For Callahan, it was redemption, a chance to prove he was better than the system he'd once blindly served. Together, they walked out of the warehouse, bruised but unbroken, ready to face whatever came next.